we are going to talk about our life lessons learned in Shakespeare's plays and our research. I'm Trinity.
I'm Nicole.
And I'm Mandy.
And Nicole is going to start us off.
Yay. The life lesson that I learned from Shakespeare is to always catch up on your sleep, because if you don't sleep, it can affect your mind a lot in many different ways, and I think we see this a lot through Shakespeare and through life as well. And I related to this personally. I think I found it really important because as a college student now, I can find times where I'm like, oh, I can just stay up really late, or I cannot sleep, and I can get all my homework done and be ahead of it and then succeed. But really, if you don't sleep, you're not gonna succeed very well. I did a lot of research on this, and in Guy's and Brandon Calbury's article from 2013, The Interplay of Stress and Sleep and Impacts the BDNF Level, I learned that the BDNF level is called the brain-derived neuropathic factor, and it, like, the more you have of that, the less stressed you are, but you don't have as much of that if you are not sleeping, and that can impact how stress, like, it can make you more stressful in turn. It's more like a cycle, and that's not very good. And then in Nixon and Riley, their 2023 article, Sleep and Performance, Why the Army Must Change Its Sleepless Culture, or Sleepless Culture, I learned that, well, first of all, I think this relates to Julius Caesar because they are in the military, or it's like a military type thing, and in this article it states they need to change how little they're sleeping, because a lack of sleep can increase the risk of mental health problems and decreased cognitive and physical capacity, which can really affect like how you're interacting with others and how you're like working throughout the day. And in Sean O'Neill's Lack of Sleep Makes for a More Reckless Bet, from some time in the past, it is a study, and it says that losing a single night's sleep alters a gambler's strategy even if they think they are on the ball, which basically states or is saying that like even if you think you're doing what's right and you think that you're like on point and you're like focused and locked in, it can be like you're just not, because you don't have as much sleep to like stay sharp and on point. And so basically you can end up making like silly little decisions that you wouldn't rationally make if you were thinking longer about it.
Well, I have a question for you.
I'd love to hear it.
Okay, where does lack of sleep show up in Shakespeare's plays?
Well, lack of sleep shows up a lot in Shakespeare's plays. It shows up in Julius Caesar because first, Caesar doesn't sleep in Act 2, Scene 2, and I think that affects his decision to go to the Capitol, and then he does, in fact, spoiler alert, get murdered. And I think he wasn't really sleeping, he was stressed out. It kind of, if he was like him to his fullest extent, then he probably wouldn't have been like, you know, I'm gonna go to the Capitol because I have something to prove, blah blah blah. And also Brutus isn't sleeping in Act 2, Scene 2, and he talks about how everything feels like kind of like a dream, and how like his betrayal of another person, which you could think is like stressful. I think this stress is impacting his sleep levels, and then we all know how that ends. And then in Taming of the Shrew, Katharina, yeah, she's not sleeping in Act 4, Scene 3 because Petruchio is like, no sleep for you. And I think this really drives her mad, drives her a little crazy, and eventually, like, she chills out, but I don't think it's because of the sleep. I think it's like the lack of sleep just makes her like tired and exhausted, which I think is another point that gets her to where the play ends at.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I
Okay. What were the differences between men and women's sleep that you found?
I looked it up, and it says that women sleep more than men usually do, and it's not really stated if it's because like women need more sleep or men just sleep a little less, but that's what I found.
Nice. Okay.
Okay. My life lesson is basically the power of communication and patriotism. And one lesson I've learned from Shakespeare's play is that communication is key to resolving conflict and building stronger relationships. This principle also extends to patriotism and how we communicate our love for our country and its values, and how it can shape our nation's unity and progress. I've come to understand that patriotism isn't just in one nation. It's like in every nation. It's just in different ways. And then in my personal experience, I'm just going to bring up my study abroad experience. And in Morocco, I noticed that patriotism manifests itself differently for men and women. The country's national pride is expressed particularly in the roles men and women play in society. And basically in their society, like, men can be more outwardly expressive in showing their patriotism, and women can't. They have to kind of shy away from that, and that's just how their community is when I visited. And then in Kenya, I observed patriotism through community involvement and political activism. I visited a tribe in Masai Mara, and their community leaders act as symbols for their national pride, or nation's pride. Here, patriotism isn't just about national symbols, but it is deeply rooted in communal values and the desire to improve their society. So basically, like, the whole village will kind of vote on whether they think they should do something, and then that leader of the tribe, the king, it is a real thing, and that's who kind of approves everything. And then in Julius Caesar, he showed patriotism in his actions and just showing that leadership it was rooted with selflessness and a willingness to listen to others. However, Caesar's lack of open communication and his desire for absolute control ultimately led to his downfall. And then in The Tempest, Prospero's patriotism is rooted in his devotion to his rule over the island, but it also reflects a more personal attachment to the land. He sees himself as the rightful ruler, but his desire for power and control often leads to misunderstanding with other characters, which could also be solved by communication. His patriotism, like Caesar's, is flawed because it isolates him from meaningful communication with others. And then in my research, I researched this article called America's Patriotism in Military, and it basically explored how patriotism in the U.S. is expressed not only through political activism, but also through the military, where it is deeply embedded in national identity. In America, the ability to express both love and criticism of one's country is a unique form of patriotism that really isn't seen in other countries that I visited. And then I researched another article that's called From Teachers to Preachers by Hooper. And then this research focuses on how patriotism is communicated through education systems, particularly in countries like Kenya, where community leaders and teachers shape national identity. In this context, patriotism can begin with a simple desire to improve one's community, demonstrating that patriotism doesn't always begin in politics. It often starts with communication at the root level.
Nice. What is an example of patriotism that went so far it became negative in real life and in Shakespeare?
Okay, so in real life, the one example I can think of is when the Capitol got stormed by protesters, and it just became a violent act of like free speech instead of peaceful and almost like getting the point across. It just became violent. And then in Julius Caesar, I would kind of say it correlates with each other. Like, it just became too violent. Like, it could have been solved with communication and keeping peace between everybody, but instead they had to kill people to, in their mind, make it right. So
and when you were traveling, when visiting countries, did you see a noticeable difference between men and women and patriotism, like being patriotic?
Yes. So when I visited Morocco, it was Ramadan, and basically during that time, men were allowed to like talk about their country, and they're allowed to show like how much they love their country freely, but women were hidden. Like, they wear all black and like head to toe covered. They can't really express themselves and like basically have any single thought to themselves, like has to go through the man of the household, which I thought was really interesting. And that's like one of the examples that I thought that men and women were like treated like it's different than it is here.
Nice. Okay, my lesson is that women are valuable in every aspect of life. And I say this because throughout all the plays that we looked at, women were not, they, like, Katerina was part of the plot, but she wasn't a character in the plot, if that makes sense. So the first article that I found is Mutual Influences of Mothers and Daughters' Mental Health on the Closeness of Their Relationship by Hyungi Lee. And basically it talks about how when a daughter saw her relationship with her mother as poor, her mental health was also poor. So you can see that reflection, which I want to tie back to Katharina, because I think no relationship with her mother, I think we can assume that she died because she's not in it, not mentioned. You can just see that she has like this kind of poor relationship. So obviously her mental health is poor. She treats everybody poorly, and that's just not good. But I also want to say that in the article I found, that when a mother sees her mother-daughter relationship as poor, it does not reflect in her mental health, which I think is super important, because it shows that women have the resilience and the capacity to deal with more than just being a mother. And I want to connect this back to Julius Caesar, where I don't remember whose wife, I think it might have been Brutus's wife, that was like, share with me what's going on. And he's like, oh no, like, you can't deal with it. But she could have. And I think that's very important to acknowledge. My second article is about single parenting. And I found that children with a single parent have complications in their development, like lack of creativeness and better chance of them having depression. And they also have anger and resentment towards the parent that is still with them, which is also reflected in Kate. You can see that obviously she treats her father very poorly, and even her sister, if we think of like the people she still has, she treats everyone poorly, which I think could be a reflection of that. And the third article that I found is, the second article that I found is by Hinal Shah, and it is called Single Parenting, Impact on Child's Development. But the third article that I'm going to use is a TED Talk by Sage Levine called The Secret Powers of Female Entrepreneurs. And she highlights that when women try to start a business and they do business like men, thinking like faster, bigger, better, they do not have that much success. But when women think of their business and they think in terms of building relationships and quality over quantity and empathy, that they have a lot of success, which I think is super important to note, tying back to like Brutus's wife, that she can do business, but it's just not how the men like it to be done. I also want to mention that in the TED Talk, she mentions a quote by the Dalai Lama, and he says, women need to be in business more because they're more empathetic. And I think it's super important to think that women are more empathetic, and we see men as, like, men are more like I said, when they do business, bigger, better, not very empathetic. So that's why women need to be more incorporated in all aspects of life, because they're more empathetic. Yeah, and I tied this back to my own life, because in my office, it's only me and one other girl. And before I was hired, she was the only girl, and she automatically took the role as the homemaker, restocking the kitchen, restocking the fridge, like doing all the cleaning and everything, which is not really what should have happened. It should have been an effort from everyone, but it was the women's role. But yeah.
Okay, ready?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think a mother's influence for Katerina would have changed her behavior towards men?
I think so, because mothers or women are more empathetic. But I don't think it's specifically towards men because she was mean to her sister. So I just think she would be more empathetic overall.
So I grew up with a single parent too, and how do you think single parenting affected Miranda and the Tempest?
So in that article about single parenting, it also showed the flip side of the benefits, just like not the cons, the pros of single parenting. And it said that children, like, it causes a lot of bonding because there's only one parent, only one person to bond to. They have a lot of resilience, which Miranda, I think, does. She had resilience from after what happened with her in Calaman. But also, they had to build their own community because a household is, like, automatically its own community, but with so few people, they have to kind of go and build their own, which I think was very successful for Miranda and Prospero in The Tempest. Yeah.
And that's us. Bye.
Bye.